we went through quite a bit of information with Daniel. We presented 4 different companies to you. Now we're going to go through a panel discussion around a few topics which I thought were interesting to address in front of you today. So can we please have all my panelists join us? So Daniel, Sean. And yeah, that was a pretty heavy content panel, so I hope you're with us. Okay, you guys. So let's start with Daniel. So you gave us a sense of a number of developments happening in medicine in many different areas. I'd like to ask you, as a scientist first, what is the most exciting to you? What are 1 or 2 things that you want to see happening in the next 2, 3, 5 years?
I think kind of the most exciting element is that we're starting to get the data scientists mixed up with the clinician scientists and the research scientists. So this explosion of omics, whether it's your digital exhaust from your wearable devices to your personal microbiomes or genomes or social data, are starting to be integrated, a little bit like I postulated about the GPS for your health or the check engine light. It's still early days, but I think it's that integration that's happening, and the folks that many folks who are traditionally never in healthcare are applying those sorts of data analytics, user interface, design thinking skills to make that not just data but actionable information and inform everything from drug discovery to global health.
And are there sort of standards being developed to enable that integration?
There's a huge, the Betamax versus VHS problem is huge in medicine, particularly with health records that don't talk to each other. There's a huge opportunity to harmonize information and data platforms. So they don't always, all the rules are not set. There's tremendous challenges from the regulatory perspective as well as the reimbursement side. Some of these new technologies have only been around for a few years. You can't do the traditional 5 or 10-year clinical trial before you fund them or get them into the clinic. So there's really amazing opportunities to cross-collaborate between companies, institutions, startups, and beyond.
So, to startup entrepreneurs in the room with us today, if you were to point to a couple of opportunities that you think are really sort of ripe for creation or disruption, which ones would you sort of single out?
I think it's, I made the joke about, and there's, overused, the Uberification of healthcare. It's the taking things that used to be difficult, expensive to access, siloed, and without insight. Where's the cab? And blending those elements together. That takes design thinking, that takes layering a lot of the technologies we have here. And so I think the most exciting thing is not to wait for the future, but to create it by blending the sensibilities that many folks here have built, whether it's like the open tables for making restaurant reservations that turned into the ZocDocs for making doctor reservations. The lessons like Sean has leveraged from behavior change, in person at Harvard to appification. And so I think the tremendous opportunities are to take exactly what we have now and blend it in fast integrated forms that can be distributed, tested, and valued quickly.
Awesome. So Jessica, you told us about this very unusual type of crowdsourcing of big data about your gut, which I thought was really fascinating. So what are the long-term implications of having all this mass of information available?
So I think there are long-term implications both at the individual level and at the systemic level. I think for individuals, it will be this tremendous bloom of personalized services that are valuable specifically to you, and this empowerment that you get when you can design scientific studies around your own data to answer your own questions and get your own results. I think that's a tremendous shift in the way that the scientific research will be done. And I think 20 years from now, we'll just think it was ridiculous that we studied 100 people and thought those conclusions would apply to everybody. So I think that's true at the individual level. I think at the systemic level, I think there are a lot of things that need to be worked out, questions around ethics, around data storage, around privacy, around regulation. Like all those things are very important infrastructure that needs to be put into place to make sure that this works well for everybody. But I think at a systemic level, it will just lead to a much more responsive scientific and medical system where people who currently aren't being studied, people who don't live, who aren't basically white, young American males, are not being studied in scientific research. And I think that they need to be. And so as individuals are empowered to create their own research, they'll be able to study questions that are of interest specifically to them, interest to women, to people who don't live in the US or Western Europe. And I think that will be really powerful on a systemic level for creating a very different kind of more responsive science.
So we've been talking about personalized medicine for a number of years. Are you sort of the missing piece?
So I think ubiome is definitely, I mean, obviously I would think that ubiome is a missing piece. But I think it's like many things we've been talking about for a long time that are now possible because there's this critical mass of people on the internet. There's this ease of being able to do this research really quickly. I think the way we crowdfunded our project is a really good, our company to start with is a really good leading indicator of that. It's also true that, so 11 out of the top 30 projects in Indiegogo are in some way quantified self, citizen science, research-based, which I think indicates this huge hunger in the public to be a part of science. This has been coming for a long time, but I think in the past people thought of it as coming from the research establishment to personalize things for individuals. But I think what's happening and what we now realize needed to happen is that it needed to come from the individuals to shake up the system.
So there's a huge shift towards personal empowerment and the fact that it's all about you taking over, from the medical sector about your wellness, which is a really interesting sort of sector. So Sean, at Omada Health, this is really what you guys are trying to sort of enable by offering this support for personal sort of health improvement. So how do you sort of see this really becoming mass market? You've been a successful startup, you've raised quite a bit of capital, we'll talk about it a bit later, but how do you see this really sort of becoming a reality and a standard as opposed to the fitness nuts that seem to be singled out these days?
Good. So it's a good question. I think for us in particular, there's almost kind of a motivation and action discrepancy we're trying to solve for. So what's interesting in the diabetes space is if you tell people they have prediabetes, 68% actually go off and they try to lose weight. So 68%, that's a huge number. I mean, if you survey the population at large that likely could use losing a little bit of weight, it's not going to be that high. So you have this big bump in motivation. But then what happens is if you look at the control arm of pretty much every single study, right? You hand someone a pamphlet, you send them on their way, you're like, you should go lose weight. They don't do it, right? It doesn't happen because after that moment of finding out your risk, you leave that office and you're like, oh, well, diabetes is bad because nobody wants diabetes. But then you don't know what to do. You think, oh, well, diabetes is about high blood sugar. Should I stop eating sugar? My doctor told me to lose weight. How much weight should I lose? How do I lose weight? Losing weight's extraordinarily hard. It's incredibly hard. So you really you kind of don't have what you need. And, I think the way that we become successful is we make that choice binary, right? You find out you have prediabetes, you're confused, you're perhaps a bit scared. You can choose to either sign up for a program that guides you along that route and gives you the best shot of being successful possible, or you can try to do it yourself. And that becomes a much easier decision. And we even see that in our data. When we work with provider groups, like Kaiser Permanente and others that actually send patients our way, we get incredible conversions into the program, and people do extraordinarily well. And so I think that's kind of the missing piece. The idea, digital health 1.0 in my mind was a little bit about tools, right? It's getting data, right? It's through accelerometers and scales that send data and other things that send data. Digital health 2.0 is using that data to craft a programmatic kind of social experience around a person that actually gets them kind of where they need to be. And so I think that's what we're trying to create.
And I think the interesting blend of that is sort of digital meets pharmaceutical, digiceutical. Yep. The fact that you and others are now able to literally have a physician prescribe that and have it reimbursed is a whole new blend. And some of the new pharma companies and older ones as well are starting to build apps and leverage those with the actual drug and the behavioral components.
No, to build off that, there is no doubt in my mind that 5 to 10 years out, almost every single drug, device, even procedures will be accompanied by digital experiences around them that improve their efficacy and adherence, et cetera.
We're seeing that too. We're seeing something very
So what's interesting is that scenario you described is exactly what happened to me. So 5 years ago, I was told that I was 2 years away from being type 2 diabetic, and that sort of that awareness allowed me to start losing weight. But the big discovery was that I was gluten intolerant, and going on a gluten diet allowed me to lose 30 pounds. Anyway, so is this the result of a personal commitment? Like, I got the wake-up call and I lost 30 pounds, or is it really something that the employers, potentially thanks to you and your programs, can sort of push down and force?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I mean, and congrats. That's on kind of your health journey. It's you fall kind of in the bell curve, pretty far to the right. If you look at the average person that finds out they have prediabetes, they do need a lot of support. So, we want to provide that. Employers, we do work with employers in the U.S. About 55% of the private market for kind of risk, who pays for the cost of healthcare, is actually a self-insured employer. So we'll work with them. They'll essentially financially sponsor the program on people's behalf, and it's our job to make it seem awesome and like something you want to do and helpful. But like you said, they can create, an employer can be a great vehicle, because in some of our deployments, we'll get the CEO of these employers to like write a letter that they send out to everyone that says like, look, we care about health at our company. Diabetes is a huge, it's a wreck from an epidemiological standpoint. We have to do something. So we want to take action. We care about you. Let's do it, which really helps.
Yep. So body hacking is a fascinating topic, and I mean, without touching performance-enhancing drugs, if you can. But gathering specific information through sensors and trying to sort of modify outcomes is really what a couple of you guys are about. So, Ida, you play in the reproductive health sector. So, and you mentioned it's really sort of underserved. You're one of the first companies in the space. So can you tell us more about your vision for that sort of category?
Yeah, so a little bit like with the microbes, right? Instead of working against your hormones, you really just want to know what's going on in your body. And that's a data point that you have to interface with the body to get, because you can get so far with a thermometer and with looking at your own body. You can actually get surprisingly far, and you can get a lot of body insights, which are useful in many ways. But to really pinpoint what days am I actually fertile, you have to use sensors in some format together with your phone so that you can work with the data, of course. And I think that the pill has been fantastic for its time, but I think there's a new generation of women who want to have less chemistry. They just want to know what's going on in their bodies and in their, in their body, not in some statistical average. And we can really do this now. We are on the path of being able to do this. And then, it's really very simple. You are just getting that piece of information that you need, and then you can use a condom those couple of times per cycle where you can get pregnant, or whatever you want to do, right? So I think, I really do think that it's possible to create an alternative which is data-driven and non-invasive, and that's the path that we're on. I want to just clarify the product in the market now. It's not meant for not getting pregnant, so don't use it to not get pregnant. I just want to kind of clarify this. This is the vision, and we are getting there.
And what do you think it takes to actually replace the control pill and have that approach deemed safe?
Do I think it will be safe? If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be putting all my life juices into it. I really do truly believe that we can get there. Of course, this is something that will have to go through, clinical trials, and we'll have to do a pill index and all the rest. But I think it's really interesting, because we have a lot of users, and we get a lot of users saying, I know you say I shouldn't use this to not get pregnant. I do it anyway. And then I'm thinking, as an entrepreneur and as the CEO there, I want to make my product live up to the way that people actually use it. There is a huge push from our users to get to a point where they can really use it for this purpose.
I think there's actually a tremendous business-to-business opportunity here. We were kind of talking yesterday. You want about the sort of long tail of your personal health in terms of women's health. That's now tied increasingly to the microbiome or the vaginal biome. We call it the vaginome. And there may be products in the future where Jessica's company may do the analytics, and you could be prescribed a reboot of your system that would help with, fertility and beyond. And so
you heard it here first, the vaginome.
Yeah, I think it's great.
So this overlap of being able to acquire personal data, tune to it, and then adjust that with other new blends is important.
I think that's an awesome idea, and I think the whole area of female health has been completely underserved. It's one of the things that we spend the most healthcare money on, but it's also one of the least funded areas. So I think there are a ton of market opportunity there.
So Dan, who I work with as his investor, hates when I talk about brain hacking, about what Halo does in neurostimulation. So there's a large body of science that proves the efficacy of neurostimulation. And when we start marketing the device, we'll have to prove it to our audience. So can you just share with us a little bit about the tests that you've already been running to prove the numbers that you share with us?
Yeah, sure. So the numbers that we showed today were the results of our experiments looking at working memory. So we use metrics that we got from science, metrics that have been used for decades that are sort of the canonical test for working memory. We also dug through the research and we found specific areas of the frontal lobe that when stimulated could improve working memory. So you take the combination of those two hypotheses that if you stimulate this part of the brain that you can generate gains in these cognitive markers that represent working memory, measure them, compare them to a control group and see what you get. I think it's critical that we prove to the world that this thing works. There's plenty of snake oil out there. We want to be that shop again that's connected to science and medicine, that's doing rigorous scientific research so that we can prove that this is not only safe, but that it actually works.
So can you show your wrists again? So you see Daniel's wrist, right? So do you see the same competition in the headband market where we'll have a stack of headbands? Because neurostimulation is actually interesting.
I don't know how many headbands you can squeeze onto one's head, but yeah, maybe Daniel will figure it out. But no, I think what Muse and other companies have done is really some beautiful design work on some technology that actually came out decades ago. I mean, this is biofeedback. So reading EEG through a beautiful design packaged for consumers, paired with modern consumer electronics. I think there's a lot to gain from that. That said, I think there's tremendous technical challenges with reading EEG. Neurons are tiny, the skull is very thick, so the signal that you get is very small. And so harvesting that signal and also processing that signal in a way that's meaningful, I think will represent technical challenges for the field.
So let's talk about the big elephant in the room. We see all those advances in technology and concepts, and it feels like the regulatory framework is really still backward. And if anything, actually getting tighter as far as the US is concerned. So Daniel, any insight as to whether the FDA is going to get this advancement in the way they actually perform this oversight, and whether it's true that launching a device company is easier in Europe because the framework is just looser?
Yeah, I think in terms of regulatory and reimbursement, it all sort of depends around the incentives. In the US, Medicare's new mantra is they're only going to sort of fund and approve technologies that give you better care at lower cost. And the regulatory bodies, however, who want to approve these elements are not really thinking exponentially. They don't necessarily know how to regulate a brain-computer interface headset or a mobile app for that matter. They're starting to figure out that, if it's an app that tracks your steps and your food intake, it's a bit different than an app that will tell you how much insulin you're taking. So there's some gradation there. The challenge is for these agencies to start thinking where the curve is going to be in a few years, and they're not really in that bucket. Same thing goes for the payers. The real angle on all this is if Sean's company is going to be successful, he needs the Blue Crosses and the Medicare to reimburse these elements, and those need to be aligned as well. As insurance companies and payers, whether it's the National Health Service or the systems here in France, see that doing some proactive elements, whether that's meditation, changing your microbiome, using apps to track your women's health, will end up with long-term outcomes that save them money. That brings alignment into place. And so with these regulatory issues, we need sort of the empowered consumer, everyone sort of to play a role in pushing the right regulatory elements, balancing privacy, especially with digital data, and the ability to take some of these innovations and move them into the clinic more quickly. We don't need to wait the 10 years and $1 billion per drug that's been the sort of meme in the past. We can start to do things more smartly, and everybody across the technology spectrum can play a role in that.
So then, how do you think about this sort of playing with the FDA by staying away from the FDA kind of approach?
I think that's certainly a prudent model because the FDA, they're very slow to react. They're very difficult to work with. In my prior company, we had an epic 2.5-year battle with the FDA, which we ultimately got approved, but it was challenging. But I also think it's a little bit dangerous in that the FDA is trying to do something that I think is something that we all want, right? We want safe, efficacious devices and therapies. So, to work around the FDA and not operate under those principles, I think is very dangerous.
So we're in Europe, where privacy is definitely taken very, very seriously. And Jessica, we're about to share our data about our guts. So how do you bring together the need for privacy and the need for sharing for such sort of intimate data?
It is really intimate data. We take that really seriously. It was interesting when our product launched. A lot of scientists were some of our early customers, and they had the exact opposite concern, which was, are you going to open source this data so anyone in the world can learn from it and just post it up on the internet? So we sort of had on one side open science activists saying, post everybody's microbiome on the internet for anyone to use. And on the other side, we had individuals who want their data to be private and protected and don't want everyone in the world to have access to it. So the happy medium that we found is to allow the individual to control their own data. You can download your own data. You can do whatever you want with it. You can post on the internet. We just had a customer recently who posted his microbiome on GitHub, so anyone can see it and do whatever they want with it. But we won't do that. We do allow access to research partners who sign an agreement with us, basically saying they're not going to sell it or post it on the internet or do anything with it other than the specific research that we've partnered with them to do. But we give the individual control, and then we, in a controlled way, allow scientists to have access to it for specific research purposes, which we find to be the good, sort of a good medium between those things. But it is a tricky issue because there's an absolute trade-off between the individual's right to privacy and the scientist's right to, or the scientist's ability to innovate. And I think the best way to sort of adjudicate between those two things is to let the individual control that.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about financing, because all this innovation needs to be financed. So I showed that over the last roughly 4 quarters, about $3 billion was invested in the space by VCs, 80% in the US. That's the good news. The question is, how hard is it to actually get that financing? So Sean, you actually have raised the most to date, $30 million from USVP and Anderson Horowitz and a bunch of great angels. Congratulations. So what did you have to prove to get to the next round, as the company sort of matured and developed? What were the hurdles?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually, selling into enterprise healthcare in the U.S. is extraordinarily challenging. It's an amazingly complicated space. You have to deal with 400 different acronyms and actually deeply understand what all of them mean. And so we've kind of gone through 3 phases. And in some, it is a little bit of digital health companies like ours. They have kind of different funding requirements and kind of pathways than consumer or SaaS businesses. It's like we need a little bit more money than the average consumer and SaaS business. We need less than the average medical device or therapeutic business. We're kind of right in the middle. For us, it was incredibly tricky to sell our program to anybody until we had data. We tried, I'd go try to pitch an employer and be like, hey, how about you try working with us and we'll collect data together. It doesn't work. So for us, in order to even close customers, we had to get data. So we ran a study, we did it ourselves. We started talking to UCSF, but the time windows were not aligned. They're like, well, we'll start recruiting in 6 months. I'm like, no. We need to start this next month. So we ran a study. That helped a ton. That allowed us to close our kind of first customers, our first 10 customers. It allowed us to, raise our B to, close the next 50. It's interesting. It's hardest earlier. It gets better later. The beginning stage is really tricky because you're on the other side of a big health plan and they're thinking, well, is this company going to be around in 5 years? Should I, develop this long commercial contract with them? And what you want to say is, yeah, if you sign this contract, I'll definitely be around in 5 years. But that's kind of ours. So, but the market's good. There's a lot of excitement in the space, which is fantastic, and there's a lot of enormous both opportunity for good and financial opportunity.
So Jessica, you have a very unusual sort of value proposition. So how did you get that financed? How did you prove that?
So that's a very good point. It was a little bit different for us because we're sort of on this in 2 worlds at the same time. There's the life sciences world where traditional lab-based tests and medical devices are developed, and then there's the consumer internet world, which we're also in, which has totally different financing requirements, totally different investors, totally different things they're looking for. And I think for us, we partnered with Andreessen Horowitz. Our partner there was one of the very few people in the world who developed a next-generation sequencing DNA test, like what we have, and sold it directly to the public and to healthcare professionals. So there was just a very good fit for us. I think it was rare to find that fit, and we're very glad we did. But I think my advice to other people who are sort of in a similar space is that consumer internet is starting to open up to biotech, however you want to define that, to digital health, just sort of this whole spectrum of medical and health investments. And I think that as money's pouring into that side, people will see that life sciences and biotech isn't this super scary, weird world. It shares a lot in common with consumer internet, and there are ways to have the same kind of profits that you have in consumer internet in the life sciences world.
So I want to ask Dan what he needs to convince me to invest in him, so I'll answer. It's basically a pretty unique team, awesome team that Dan has assembled, and a product which is really sort of fascinating in a market that we believe was just enormous. And so that's why at the very early stage of the company, we decided to become his lead investor and back the team, and we've been very pleased with our decision. So Ida, you're the only European on the panel. So can you give us sort of a quick glimpse of what it took or what it takes to be a healthcare startup funded here?
Yeah, so I recognize this thing of merging these two worlds of mobile and life sciences. And to be very honest, I'd say it's a big issue in Europe that very few funds have an investment thesis that allows them to do this combination. And the American funds, they are very local. They don't want to invest necessarily in somebody who's on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So I think there is a great opportunity for more investors to go explore this area in Europe.
Well, if you're interested, we will be happy to welcome you in the US.
I know, but Berlin is such an awesome place to stay, you know?
Great. Well, we're out of time, so I'm going to ask you to thank our panelists, Ida, Jessica, Sean, and Dan. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jeff.
So, Daniel, we spent about an hour and 25 minutes giving a glimpse, very accelerated glimpse, thanks to you, of the future of medicine. Any thoughts you want to share with our audience about what you're most excited about and want to see happening in the next 5 years?
I think what I'm most excited about is that there's a tremendous amount of opportunities and challenges in healthcare, and many of the folks in this room who've developed technologies for the web and beyond haven't yet applied those in the healthcare space, but are becoming this new instigation for digital, connected, and mobile health that's driven by the web. And if any of you want to apply your skill sets to healthcare in general, find a physician, find a patient, find a healthcare system that has an unmet need, and take some of the technologies and tools that you've built and see how they might cross-fertilize, whether it's lessons from ride-sharing or social networks or ways to leverage big data and make it personalized. So it's a really interesting time for innovation. While there are regulatory challenges and reimbursement challenges, those are opening up a bit. There's Health 2.0 type thinking that's starting to trickle into the innovation circles. And the second lesson I would leave is that don't forget to recognize the pace of exponential change. We've only had smart mobile phones for 6 years. If we look out another 5 years, what are all the technologies that can layer into our wrists, into our bodies, and the Internet of Things that's going to give us the ability to be the CEO of our own health, own our information, share it selectively, crowdsource both device and drug development, but also just like when we use Google Maps and release a little bit of our privacy, bring that data back to something useful at the point of care, whether that's driving or your personal GPS.
And so you had the Future of Medicine conference, Exponential Medicine conference 3-4 weeks ago in San Diego. What were a couple of things that really surprised you or blew your mind? Because you had like a week worth of presentations and panels like this.
At Exponential Medicine, which is out of Singularity University, we blend all these different technology fields from regenerative medicine and stem cells to Internet of Things and big data. One of the most sort of mind-blowing elements was we had Craig Venter there, who actually was one of the folks to first sequence the genome, now is involved in synthetic biology, this whole new ability to write DNA. So then the new kids growing up today will be coding in DNA and creating synthetic life. But the facts like Craig Venter, Google has spun out Calico, Peter Diamandis and others have Human Longevity Inc. They're leveraging not just our low-cost genomics, but the Internet of Things information, our microbiome, to approach things, big hairy things like longevity and curing cancer. And it's a very cross-disciplinary world now. And so part of the excitement and interest at Exponential Medicine and beyond is to pull these things together. And I think the audience at LeWeb, we could easily do the medical web next year because so many touch points are here. I had the chance to talk to Sir Tim Berners-Lee last night at dinner. And it's really interesting to see the opportunity now with data sets that are still constrained and not often private, to opt those in, to sharing your own data, to allowing the pharma company, the drug company, the individual to crowdsource their own clinical trial. So I think the blending of all the sensibilities is where the real inflection points are going to be.
Yeah, I think, my hope in volunteering for this panel was to show you guys that by leveraging some of the same pieces of technology, whether it's big data, mobile, cloud, you can actually build startups that deal with some issues that actually matter. I've been sort of on the record to say that if ever you bring me yet another photo sharing startup, I'm going to puke on it. And feel free to do that if it's your thing. But I do hope that spending an hour and a half with those entrepreneurs and this expert shows you that there is so much to be done in the healthcare space that, trying to do a healthcare startup that doesn't require for you to be an MD per se is actually a thing that could make a lasting impact and is worthy of thinking about. Thank you so much for your attention. We hope this was useful. Enjoy the rest of the web.
Thank you.